Welcome back to this third video where we'll talk about putting in a terrain and also hopefully get some start on our sort of player movement script. So first thing that we're going to do though is add that terrain. And so for a 3D game, we're going to go to the scene window here and we're going to add a terrain. And so it lets us add hills, paint it with some textures and so on. So we'll just sort of talk a little bit about that. So if you go under Game Object, 3D Object, and Terrain, it puts in this huge plane, which I believe is about a square kilometer, 1,000 meters by 1,000 meters. Much too big for our game. And you can, just to give you that perspective, right? There's our robot, and then that's the terrain there. So what I'm going to do is do the settings first. And there's a bunch of stuff you can do, and again, much more detail than we need at the moment. All we really want to do is set the terrain size here. So let's just find that. And it should be 1,000 by 1,000 here. There we are. So terrain width, terrain length, and we'll just set that down to 200. It's probably still too big. We can fix that up after. Whatever. This would be the maximum height if you wanted, and the resolution, we'll just leave it as it is. So now you can see it's still pretty big, but it's a little bit more manageable. The next thing that we'll do is just move that terrain so that the character is sort of in the center of it, right? So this is 0, 0, and everything's sort of located around that. That terrain's located at 0, 0, but of course it's pushed it off. If it's 200 by 200, it should be located at basically 100 by 100, and so let's just move it a little bit first, and then let's see, we got this terrain, and then we just make sure we get roughly at, yeah, so negative 100, negative 100. So let's just type those in, and that just sort of keeps everything centered nicely. All right, so we can zoom in on our player here. Now we're not going to do too much here with the terrain, but just to show you some of the options, if you've never played with the terrain guy here, like this terrain editor, you can take a brush, and it's really big at the moment. I'm going to reduce the opacity and reduce the size. And so you've got this little brush here, and I think we're on raise and lower terrain, and you can click, ooh, why is it doing it so quickly? Anyways, we'll just reduce that opacity. There we go. I just have to click on it a little slower. And you can actually create little mountains. I think if you hold the shift key, it will bring it down. So left click to raise, hold shift and left click to lower. So you can set it back down to 0. So that's something that you can do if you want. We're just going to do this flat. If you look here as well, you could paint holes. I don't know. I've never. Ooh, you got I guess a real hole in your ground. Okay, interesting. And a few other things there. Maybe another one that's useful is set height. So you could set the height. Maybe you want to kind of create a plateau or something like that. 10. Usually that creates a plateau. Oh, okay. So there's 10 meters. Okay, so it's just a little high. But you can see it sort of forming that flat area. So actually, if I maybe bring that down to maybe 5 or something a little bit more. I guess when we're talking about meters, 5 meters is pretty big, right? And you can see you can kind of create like a plateau or something like that. And there's smooth and so on. So you can just sort of work your way through it if you want to sort of add some of this later on. But just to give you an idea of what you can do, I guess. So once we're back with sort of our terrain, which is 200 meters by 200 meters, and he's centered there, the next thing that we want to do is sort of be able to paint the terrain. So there's this paint texture here. And at the moment, we don't really have any textures. We can go in and get those textures. Just have to sort of figure out where. When you click on this edit terrain, you can create a layer and you can see the ones that we've got. And so it doesn't really make any sense to use these at the moment because they're not really terrain ones. They're to do with our robot. So let us go to the asset store and download one. So you've done this before. Window, I think we put it under here, asset store. And we're going to search. They've moved it online. Yes. Let me just bring this over. And the one that I've used here is called 5 Seamless Tileable. 5 Seamless. There it is. So it's a free one, and it just gives us some surface here. So we'll just download this guy, add to my assets. Oops, I've got to log in here. Okay. And then once they are downloaded, did it download here? Turn on dark mode. We don't need to dark mode. Add to my assets. I don't know if it did already. Oh, accept. Okay, so I got to bring those in. Okay, so it should be now. Oops. Open in Unity. Open. So we should be able to go back to Unity and see that there. Let's go back to our scene here. Okay. You need to sign into everything here. And so once I've finally got that, I've got it there, and I can download it into my game. Okay. So it should just take a second there. It's not a very big thing. And we should find it in our packages here, at the very bottom. Okay, I've got a bunch of stuff here. Did I put it in? We've got to import. Oh, there. Sorry, didn't press import. Forgot. We'll import it all. There. Now it should be in there. So I've got my 5 seamless tileable things there, and there's my materials. And go and look. So there are different materials there. I mean, we're going to want our textures in the end. So there's all our textures that we could use. So now we should be able to actually paint with this. So go back to your terrain, and we can go back to our edit terrain layers. I guess create new layer. And you know, you can choose which one you want to use here. If you want to use the gray, I'm just going to use this brown, I don't know, the darker one. Sure, the darker one there. And you can see that it just paints it all in. And later on, if you want to paint on top of it, you can with a different layer. But this is kind of our base layer here that you can see. When you click on this, it does give you a few options. You can put a normal map on, which would give it some depth, right? I'm not sure what mask map would do. You can play with the specularity, metallic smoothness, whatever else. The one thing that you can do that's more common is play with the tiling size. So if you need to make those bigger or smaller, you can. But I think that's probably good there. All right, so we've got a base ground. Okay, nothing too exciting, but at least we've got that there. Let's get into the scripts. But before I do, let me clean up some of this. It's looking kind of messy. So we got our prefabs. Let's just see. Okay, so those are all separate. These packages. Okay, so first thing that perhaps I should do is probably create a little folder to hold these packages that we download. So that's often a good idea. So I'm just going to create a new folder, and I'm just going to call them the packages, I guess. And then just throw this in, because we'll bring in other things later on. So just to keep it sort of clean. And we don't have a scripts folder. So I'm going to create a new scripts folder. And in there, let's make our first script. And so we'll create our first C# script here. And we'll call that player movement. And we'll start coding. So we're not going to do anything too fancy here, just get the movement down, at least at the start for this video. So I'm going to come right under the update, and what we'll do is our good old horizontal and vertical axes. So we've seen this multiple times before. Doesn't really need an explanation. Make sure you spell everything correctly, especially horizontal. And then same thing with vertical. So these are floats. These are values between -1 and +1. Vertical equals input. And then we will translate that into a vector 3. So once we get that in there, we'll do a vector 3 with the movement. So just combining those two, we'll call it movement. And so it is going to be a new vector 3. And basically, as you get aware, horizontal, we're not going to have anything on the vertical. And then on so on the vertical axis, the y-axis, and on the z will be the vertical. I know it sounds a little confusing, but you know what I'm talking about. And so just to smooth out the movement there, we will make sure we multiply it by, we'll just do an augmented operator there, multiply it and equal to time dot delta time. There we go. And we'll also create a speed variable. So we'll do that in a second. We haven't defined this yet, so it's going to give me an error, but that's fine. And then finally what we'll do is we'll actually get the character to move. So we'll use the transform.translate based on that movement. And this is a little bit different here. Before, that's all we needed to do. Because we're working in 3D, we need to deal with the space. And so we're going to make it relative to the space.worlds. Okay, so that's typical for 3D games. When you want it to move it around, we need to define that. Okay, so make sure that you put that in. So it says there the coordinate space in which to operate. So we know in there in the world XYZ. Okay, so up at the top here, we're going to put in that speed one. So speed, whoops, we'll set this to, first of all, sorry, a serialized field. Serialized field, so we can access it, but it's not really a public variable. We'll make it a float, and we're going to call it speed. And I think to set it off, we'll put 5, but of course we can change that if we need to. So there's no access to the animation here at the moment, so the character isn't going to animate, but we should be able to get it to move. So let's save that and double check. And then we can probably call that pretty good video here. So make sure you grab your player, you grab your player movement. Notice we're not using add force or anything, so we don't need a rigid body or anything here. I'm gonna hit play, and there he goes. So, right, he's moving, okay, which is what we want. We just need to hook up the animator with that at the moment, and we're going to do that through that that value, right? So on the horizontal and x-axis, we're able to tell it which animation to play. Good. So we'll save it up here, and we'll end this video, and we'll come back and put the animator in.